in America is incredible. I'm African. I've never seen this kind of tribalism before. And we live in a climate of fear. And we might choose to deny it. I mean, we live in a climate of fear, and we also live in a climate of reluctance to acknowledge that fear. And one of the things that happens, I think, in this country is that in some ways there's a kind of, you're not supposed to think. You're supposed to follow your tribe. And I resist that really fiercely. But sometimes I wonder whether even that in itself is a kind of, just constantly saying, I don't believe in censorship, whether that in itself is also a kind of censorship. I wish we didn't have to think about it. I wish we lived in a world where we could just express ourselves. And for me as a writer, that it's most important to me because I think that literature is so essential. Right? And I know that there are writers, there are talented writers today in this country who are holding back, whose stories would be different if they were not writing in this climate of fear. And there's something very sad about it for me.
Sort of reminds me of this new role in publishing called a sensitivity reader. Have you heard of this? Talk about sensitivity readers.
I think maybe you should tell them what that is. Some people are looking like, what?
It's somebody who reads something before it's published to say how this piece might trigger various groups and how you could tone it down for greater, broader acceptance.
I think it's an absolute disaster. I think that even the idea of it, I think, is anti-literature, and there's something as well condescending about it for the writer and for the reader. And there's a quote I love by a journalist who writes in England, whose name is Kenan Malik, where he says that what is often considered offensive to a group is actually often internal conversations within a group. So the idea that publishers can somehow decide what will be offensive to a group is in itself potentially offensive. Mm-hmm. And I really believe in integrity of storytelling. So I think that there are people who, I suppose, just set out to offend, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about writers who are telling stories and want to tell them truthfully, especially in literature. Literature is the last frontier for journalism. I think is gone. Sorry. I think there's so much. I think the polarization in this country has really shaped journalism, and so it feels to me that literature and storytelling is the last frontier. This is how we can know who we are. This is how we can know how things feel. This is how we can understand human motivation. And if we have sensitivity readers who are saying, well, take that out because so-and-so is going to be offended, how we're going to tell lies. And there's a part of me, and this is maybe the melodramatic part of me, that I think it's terrible that we are going to leave behind for generations to come stories that are untrue. Mm-hmm. We read, I'll read Balzac to get a sense of that period in French history. I'll read the Russians because you can get a sense of what society was like. People reading contemporary writing today, I'm not sure that they would get a real true sense of what contemporary life is like. And there's a loss there. Like, it's a huge loss to us.
Yeah.
As a civilization.
I think sometimes lately that the truth-telling has now been given to comedy and stand-up. To say, you can say it. You're the only people that are left.
Yeah, but even they can't really say it.
I know.
I was talking to a woman who's a comedian, and she talked about how it was difficult to talk about the things that she cared about, honestly, because she was always thinking about who's going to be, can I not? And what it does is it makes you feel guilty of what you haven't committed. It's a very strange thing. And I think human beings, we are all fragile. We really are. And it's easy to say, oh, toughen up, you need to be thick-skinned and that sort of thing. But it's difficult. We're fragile people. And so thinking about the possibility of consequences, is likely to make you pull back.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's also could hijack the conversation in the wake of your publication.
Yes.
So if you say one thing that the sensitivity readers told you to take out.
Yes. Yes.
Then everywhere you go,
Yes.
that's the conversation. Meanwhile,
Yes.
there's hundreds of pages
Yes.
of more meaningful content there to be unpacked.
Yep.
But all anybody wants to do.
And also this sort of, there's also often a focus on saying things the right way and this kind of language orthodoxy. And what I've found is that sometimes it gets in the way of actually even talking about, so you want to talk to somebody about something, but you haven't said it the right way. And suddenly you're kind of bamboozled because they're saying to you, don't say it like that. And in doing that, we forget the substance of what we want to talk about. And we start to then sort of argue about jargon.
Yes.
And, I think we just lose something. There's something about, I came to the US to go to college in 1997. And I think America has changed a lot in that time. In a way that, and I don't mean changed in a good way, I think the level of public discourse has become so pedestrian and simple and uninteresting, boring, actually. Predictable. And there's something about it, there's a vitality that isn't there. There's, it's the sad thing about it is that I know that it's sort of underneath all the layers of bullshit.
You're allowed to say that. So I had this little idea this morning when I was brushing my teeth. I thought that we should offer to people a red, white, and blue check mark on social media if you commit to certain standards of conduct and if you allow for some external board to fact check you. So that somebody who deserves following because you stay within a factual reality. Yeah. Can you think of other systemic changes that could adjust the discourse?
I like that fantasy. I think I share it. I think maybe it should have started with the presidential debate the other day. I mean, fact checking might have been useful, but again, I think it's there's a kind of cowardice. And I think I saw it in that debate where journalists couldn't actually say this is not true, right? I know. And so, but of course, your fantasy is wonderful. I share it, but what do the social media owners think? Right? Because social media, it seems to me that it's set up to encourage this kind of extreme, unnuanced, often untrue positions that people take. But it would be lovely. I think, we should work on it, Kelly, to get this fantasy to... So I think...
I'm in.
I think that there are two just really extreme extremes in this country, and I don't think they will ever reconcile. But I do think that there is a vast, underappreciated middle of people who I really think want to have conversations and want to understand and acknowledge that we share a common humanity, all of those things. I really believe that. And maybe it's that middle that we need to think more about. Because often it's the loudest voices that end up shaping public discourse, and it shouldn't be. Because often those loudest voices are on the extreme end, and I'm a lot more interested in that middle.
Well, it's interesting to think about the things that might happen if people in the middle are afraid to speak. And one of them that you've pointed out is that we might acclimate to injustice. We might decide that it takes too much energy to constantly be noting the ways that things can and should be different.
Yeah. Which is why I think there's also sort of this need for more people to speak up, right? And I talked about being fragile humans, and we are. But there is also something about the wonderful strength that comes from knowing you're not alone.
I know.
Right? And I know that there are women who, because they have spoken in the past, they make it able for me to speak. Actually, one of them is here. This woman called Obieze Kwesili, who is an African icon.
Stand up, stand up.
And she really is. And it's true. And because she, as an example, is fearless in, speaking up and in challenging so many things that are wrong in Nigeria and on the continent of Africa, you watch her and you think, yeah, I can do this too. And of course, there are consequences, right? People are going to say stupid things and whatnot, but just knowing you're not alone. So I think in that middle in this country, people just need to. It, I don't want to sound sort of scoldy, but I am. People need to have more courage. We need more moral courage.
Yeah.
And so I can't tell you how many people have said to me privately, oh, I feel, I really agree with you, because I spoke about free speech at the Reith lecture in London, and there were people who were very upset because they felt that since I'm on the political left, I should not be talking about free speech, which is strange. But again, it's because in this country, even that idea has been co-opted by the right, right? And so for some people who are strong tribes people, you shouldn't even talk about free speech. But I'm a writer, I'm a storyteller, and free speech is essential. But there are also people who came to me privately, people from my tribe, who would say, I really agree with you, but I can't say it publicly. So I want those people to say it publicly. The more of us who speak up, and what I mean is it's speak up for nuance, speak up for plurality, speak up for anybody who reads fiction knows that there are multiple points of view in the world. There are multiple points of view. We need to speak out about those things, and I think it enriches us. And sometimes as well, when people say, oh, you're advocating for free speech because you want to give people the right to be racist or sexist or whatever, but that's not, I mean, again, that's that terrible thing of moving a conversation immediately to the extreme points. Because of course that's not what I stand for. And I think a lot of people who believe in free speech do not, of course, want people to be racist and openly sexist and whatnot.
It sort of reminds me of this James Madison quote, which is, some degree of abuse is inseparable from the proper use of anything.
Yes.
And so assume that the extremes will be there.
Yes.
And don't stop talking to the middle.
Yes. I mean, just because the extremes are there, just because there's always the possibility of abuse, of anything really, doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. It's a kind of defeatist attitude that I don't subscribe to. But it's also an excuse, I think. It's an excuse for moral laziness.
I agree.
Yeah.
So a conversation that people find really hard to have is about mortality and loss. You lost your dad. You lost your mom. In 2020, 2021, I too have lost both my parents recently. So let's have the hard conversation. How are you different? What do you know that you could only learn that way?
Oof. Let's talk about you, Kelly, instead. But I listened to your eulogy about your mother, and I was so moved by it. And there's it's sort of like we now belong to the society of the, of the bereaved, kind of
Who
way.
is in the society with us?
When your parents are gone and you feel, and especially if you had a good relationship with them, you feel unmoored. I still feel unmoored. How has it changed me? I think there are ways in which it's made me cold. Yes. I think my mother's death in particular, I made peace with my father. I was such a daddy's girl. My father was the loveliest man in the world. Really, he was. And nobody should argue with that. He really
Next to mine, but whatever.
No, mine first, then yours. and when he died suddenly.
Okay, guys, welcome back again to this particular episode. Let me call it an episode because we've had several episodes, several postings over the same. And as usual, I do not get tired with Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I tell you that she's a beacon. She's a beacon from Africa, especially that she advocates and perpetuates strongly and articulates her issues that she feels that others of the same mind need to be able to come out publicly and articulate these particular issues in pluralism. In other words, if massively this particular message massively gets out there according to the context or as part to what maybe ideas or perspectives and viewpoints that people are maybe unanimously coming up together and sharing out, it will be having a greater impact out there. And I find that I do agree. By citing an example on an audience, of course, we already shown that one there is like evidently evident that Africa needs to have very prominent, bold people whose ideas, whose opinions, whose values, whose perspectives are much stronger than other people's viewpoints, suggestions, opinion, and maybe their way of doing things. And I find that I do agree, and only then would somebody be able to realize that these people, they have got a resolute, like a strong, a kind of a resolve, and that there are people who cannot buy into this and that and that. And only when people are able to identify you like that, then they can work with your expectations. Otherwise, if you don't lay out strongly what you expect, people are likely to violate that and manipulate you to some extent. And I find that that is how maybe Western countries, or the European countries, the Western nations, China, for example, USA, for example, is able to do business with African countries individually, because they know that they can bend some rules. They can, they can make these particular individual African countries to, forgo their values, their policies, their culture to some extent. Remember at the time when the LGBTQ wanted to, okay, there was a time that that particular idea wanted to maybe find its way into individual African countries, and vehemently some leaders, good examples from Uganda, Yoweri Museveni, salute you. There are some things that really, we call them nonsense to some extent. In Africa, this is a country that we are still, okay, Africans at large, they're still struggling, first of all, to put food on the table. You can also start bringing in, should I call them tertiary matters, if you have not addressed primary and even secondary issues that are totally and gravely eating up your people. So there's some things that, you call a spade, you don't call it a big spoon, when you know very well that it's a spade right there. So we need to have people of strong resolute, people of strong thoughts, people of strong stances, strong ideas, strong opinion on who they are, so that whenever we're doing business, or whenever we're trading, we're trying maybe to do some transactions, they know that these people, their expectations are these, and if we don't provide, or we don't meet the expectations, then we are out of business. Now that is just an example, but again, people with character, they will always be able to have some strong says, strong opinion, and people are likely to listen to you when you have got a strong opinion, and that you're not able to be wavered like this, or being pushed, or being bent, or your will, or you cannot be manipulated in one or the other. And I find that that is what Africans are lacking. They're trying to play the puppets of the West, and it's high time that kings and queens of Africa, that we are able to realize this and bring it to the latter. I mean, bring it to the table, so that people know that if you are, there's this particular saying that goes around, that whoever that feeds you is is your master, and you're a slave to whoever that keeps on providing that. But it's high time that if that Africans realize that one, and be able to present themselves with strong resolute, some strong you know policies and character embodiment, so that they are not able being to be carried lightly, or to be manipulated in all the others. Guys, it has been really nice. It's late midnight, I'm trying to do this one, but again, this is a wake-up call for Africans, that we, by and large, it's this generation that we need to wake up through this particular platform, through many platforms, sharing it with different people. If you've got your comments, do patch your comments on the comment section. Let us get to know what needs to be done, how we need to do it, how we need to put ourselves in shape, so that that particular respect, is earned. See you in the next upload.